From Washington, this is the HPS Macrocast with Hamilton Place Strategies and Markets Policy Partners.
Good morning. It's Friday, September 11th, and you're listening to the HPS Macrocast. It's Tony Fratto from Hamilton Place Strategies, coming to you from New York City. Brendan Walsh and John Fagan from Markets Policy Partners. Guys, it's with a accident of the calendar that we're taping our show today on. It's our normal Friday, but it's not a normal Friday at all. It's 19 years ago was 9/11/2001, the attack on the United States by Al Qaeda terrorists. I'm sitting here in New York City. I think about this a lot in that the hashtag that accompanies this day, when you think about it, is a never forget. And I was like, it's hard. Anyone who's lived through it, I think, doesn't have trouble remembering. It's not something that you tend to forget. And I've spent most of my career in Washington D.C. and went through 9/11 in Washington D.C. I spent a lot of time in New York and now live in New York City. So we obviously remember it here. And then my house in Pennsylvania is about 10 miles from Shanksville. So we past the Shanksville Memorial whenever we come home to Pennsylvania. So it's hard to forget. It was a really it's one of these things that I think on this day, when you see some of the pictures and you see some of the you read on Twitter. One of the great things that's happened since then is being able to just scroll through Twitter and read the experiences of people who what they were going through at that time, and you get a full range of remembrances. It's hard not to get emotional from it. It's one of those days. I think I tweeted this out earlier this morning that of all the days of my life, most of my memories of any day of my life are just a wisp of a memory. You remember a moment that happened on a particular day. Maybe on things like your wedding day or your day that your kids were born, you remember bigger chunks of those days. But I'm pretty sure it's the only day that I could tell you what exactly I was doing, where I was, who I was talking to, and what I was working on for all of the hours of that day. There's no other day in my life that I can do that with. And so never forget is like, we definitely don't forget. And of course, a big impact on all the things that we're all working on. Where were you guys on that day?
I was I happened to be in Bangkok, Thailand. So I was just beginning a postgraduate study fellowship overseas to look into the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis. And my first full day in Bangkok was September 11th. And so everybody is, it's obviously an event that people process in a very personal way. And not only, just by happenstance, I didn't lose any close friends. I wasn't in New York City. I'm not a New Yorker, and I happened to be extremely far away. And so that, obviously, I missed that sort of national moment together, being overseas in Thailand. As you can imagine, very much like Americans experience a terrible occurrence halfway around the world. The Thais obviously registered it. They saw it in the news, but it was, in Thailand, it was, well, next morning is just another normal day, kind of life goes on. And it changed the experience for me. It sort of, that sort of forces me to probably think about it in a different way and, ponder the legacy and thinking about it as a formative experience personally and just for the country. And thinking about it, it is a challenging, obviously focusing on the positive legacies, that galvanizing, that national togetherness, which I observed from overseas, although experienced emotionally as an American. But the questions about exactly what the legacy of this is, if you accept the fact that this was, the formative event of our era, something that jarred us awake into the realities of the 21st century, and what has come from that. The U.S. is in a challenging place right now. Can you trace some of these issues back to 9/11, or is 9/11 better seen in a narrower cone of effect of that national security and geostrategic, the heroism of the people on the day, the heroism of the troops, the record of homeland protection and interdiction of global terrorism. It's a very I'll leave it to the geopolitical experts and smarter people on these topics than myself to try to come up with answers. But it's a time to reflect and ponder on a lot of these various aspects.
Brendan, where were you?
I was at the remote end of one of the most remote islands in the world, Ponape, in Federated States of Micronesia. After college, I volunteered for a couple of years, and I taught.
You were teaching there?
Yeah. So I found out, kind of like John, the next morning, though we didn't even have a lot of electricity where I was. So the details were very sparse. But you understood that something big happened. And I actually just got a text from one of my best friends who worked for Morgan Stanley. So once it was clear what happened, I called, which it was $1 a minute to make phone calls. So, and I used to get the $60 a month stipend. So I spent all my $60 that day calling people. And by then it was the middle of the night, and I woke him up and was very, very relieved to hear his voice.
I can imagine. It was obviously the weirdest, it was harrowing and sad and frightening, all of those things. And, I was in the Treasury building at the time, and there was lots of things that we were dealing with, including, not the least was the fact was that then Secretary Paul O'Neill was actually in Tokyo. He was supposed to travel to Beijing the next day. So he and a small group of some of our senior officials were there, and having to figure out how to get them back. But I never forget being in the Treasury building and going to then Deputy Secretary Dam's office and looking out the window. And this is before we actually evacuated the Treasury. And just seeing people streaming out of the White House, running out of the White House, because there were lots of rumors that morning of other planes in the air, and of course we now know that there was in fact at least one other plane in the air, and not knowing where it was going to go. And so we knew we had to evacuate, and as we're evacuating the building and going to a safe location, which I think it's no problem saying it now. It was at Secret Service headquarters over on 9th Street in DC. We're realizing that later that morning we have a bond auction. Or we had I think we had a 5-year bill that morning that we needed to cancel, actually it was an open question. It was do you cancel the auction? In retrospect, of course you cancel the auction, but how do you do it at a time when, in the old days, if I had to go cancel an auction, we would do it with Bureau of Public Debt, and I'd, maybe walk down to the Treasury press office and make an announcement and, bring some paper down with me for them to read. And then, the way that you actually deal with these things is there's no on off button. You go tell the reporters, and the reporters tell the world through their news services. You couldn't reach any reporters, no reporters were sitting at their desk. Everybody was evacuating somewhere. Everyone is trying to figure out what is happening with the safety of their their family and or reassuring family members that they're safe. You are chasing rumors. Cell phones aren't working. Maybe today I would tweet it out. It's just you could tweet it out and reach the world. you might call your primary dealers, or we had many fewer primary dealers back then. I think there were maybe only 16 to 20 primary dealers at that time. One of them was Cantor Fitzgerald, and Cantor Fitzgerald was on, I believe, floors 101 and 104 of the North Tower, and I think they lost something like 660 people that morning. You know, these were friends and people that we knew, and you know, you have a primary dealer that is gone and lost all these people. By the way, that's what, 20% of the number of people who died that day were just from Cantor Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
At the same time, I had to figure out how to do it. We did figure out eventually how to do it, and you know, in that morning when everybody is, you know, the biggest thing in your life has just happened, and you know it's a horrible event, and you want to do something. You know, for most people, there was nothing that you can do. You know, what can you do except get somewhere safe and wait for some instructions. To at least have something to do that day that was useful, and it's like, you know, a trivial thing to do, but it was good to at least have something to do, you know, that you could feel like.
So had the Pentagon get hit at this point?
Yeah, the Pentagon had been hit. We saw smoke rising. There were rumors that the State Department had been hit. There were rumors that there was this other plane that was either heading towards Washington, and so the expectation was that would either go to the White House or the Capitol building. But there were lots of other rumors. You know, there was a rumor of a bomb that went off somewhere. And it was once we evacuated in Washington, so everyone evacuated, and then for the next, for as long as I can remember, or for at least, weeks after that, the thing that I most remember were, soldiers in the streets carrying guns. So we had soldiers protecting buildings in the streets, and just the constant sound of helicopters in the air. So pretty much, there were all day and night, there were helicopters flying over Washington doing reconnaissance and whatever else exactly what their mission was. But you got used to this just constant sound of helicopters. So it was it was weird. To John, your point, I think it's changed everything. It changed a lot of the ways. So there were societal changes, there were political changes, there were even now dealing with the present tragedy. What do we look back to was like, well, how did we deal with things like 9/11? Did the country come together? How did it come together? How did it deal with it? What were solutions? And so I think we will always be, looking to that period for for the things that were done right, the good lessons and mistakes that were made in those early days and beyond.
Absolutely. And thinking about obviously national security and homeland security was such a theme afterward, and enormous resources were deployed into trying to get that formulation right and updated to meet the kinds of novel threats obviously represented by most prominently by 9/11, but certainly the potential for follow-ons, and that was just clearly job one. And as you say, Tony, the pandemic here has redefined national security, homeland security in another way, and it's given us a peek into the vulnerabilities and the potential the potential problems we have in other areas in when we define national security in a relatively narrow way. That's the lesson I think a lot of policymakers have taken from the pandemic, refining that idea of national security into, we've talked about it before, the security of, the supply lines for drugs and PPE and medical and other medical necessities. Economic security is now increasingly being conflated with U.S. national security. It's certainly a broadening of this concept that that we were shocked into focusing on that day 19 years ago.
I agree. Well, look, we still have our jobs to do now. Talking about how we're dealing with this present crisis from an economic and policy standpoint. So why don't we take a break here and come back and dive into how we're dealing with this present crisis today. You're listening to the Macrocast.
Markets Policy Partners provides sophisticated financial market analysis that is independent, accessible, and actionable for a broad audience. Learn more at marketspolicy.com or visit them on Twitter @marketspolicy.
All right, we're back on the Macrocast. John and Brendan, we're looking at markets this week, and we've had some up days, down days, some pretty big swings, and it's as though market participants are just they're always trying to figure out the future. But it seems like we're at one of these inflection points where you can maybe see the future, and so it seems like there's a shift on how they're looking at a lot of companies right now. What are you guys seeing?
Yeah, that's right, Tony. The counter trend price action that we've been experiencing for a couple of weeks of September now really is most notable in the sell-off in the big high-flying, richly valued, incredible performer tech stocks, and to some extent biotech and some others as well, lumped together in the broad category of pandemic winners. What Wall Street analysts are calling the stay-at-home stocks. These have had an enormous run-up. They've dragged the broader indexes up. They've, concentrated the performance in very few stocks, making the market top-heavy. So when you have a big run like this that's increasingly top-heavy, it's not necessarily a big surprise to see correction or corrective activity like we've seen over the past couple of weeks. So the motif is hardly a big surprise. The question is really about timing. What set it off? Why now? Why didn't it happen a week earlier, or so on and so forth? There are a variety of different catalysts that analysts have pointed to. There's no one obvious trigger that really set this in motion. There's a lot of discussion about kind of the technical aspects. Great amounts of call buying by SoftBank has been referenced, which leads to a self-perpetuating upcycle in stock prices, but can turn into.
What's the story with SoftBank? I mean, this is like they're they've placed some pretty large options bets here.
Yeah,
I hate using the word bets. I was,
well, options are a bet. Options are a bet because you have to be right on the timing too. They expire. But so they've done this in the past before, and it's actually one of the criticisms of buying it as a stock. This time, the trader, he's a very good trader actually, but he crushed it. But if you're an investor in SoftBank, you're like, is this really what we're supposed to be doing? Especially with that amount of assets, you're kind of supposed to take a longer term view. Mm-hmm. But yes, an option, if you're trying to make money off of an option, it's a bet. Because if the timing of it doesn't hit right, you just lose money. You pay for it and it disappears.
And if the dealers are writing you all these big call options, right, they've got to hedge their positions. And so they've got to buy the underlying. There's this interplay between the cash market and the options market, which can be a pro-cyclical upswing, which we've seen, which analysts say played a role in the sort of dizzying rise in the Nasdaq, particularly over August. And those kind of dynamics do come to an end, and that's certainly one of the technical arguments. We've been focused, in our work, we tend to focus on fundamental aspects, and certainly we've seen some of this counter trend price action triggered by these announcements about vaccines, giving investors this flash forward to the post-pandemic era, when the advantages that these pandemic winners and the stay-at-home stocks have been enjoying are eroded by by basically better public health outcomes. That's certainly another dynamic that's been in play, and
on that front, I think you get two kind of things. One is you get a good data point in terms of growth, or you get a good vaccine announcement, and then we do this rotation trade where people sell tech, and you buy things like banks and cruise lines, and that lasts for a few days. And then usually then the reality comes in, it's going to take like 6 to 9 months to roll out a vaccine. Everyone's like, okay, I'll go back to it. But also, anytime a stock like Tesla or Apple goes down 5 to 10%, everyone's like, oh, this is my entry. This is my entry.
Right.
Well, investors have been kind of caught on the hop here because they're not really convinced that the pandemic winners and stay-at-home stocks can really, continue to rip like this. I mean, the year-to-date gains
we got
outrageously high, but they're not quite ready to load up on the real economy stocks either. So we're kind of in this in-betweener mode, and we'll talk about that kind of dynamic in economic data as well.
We got some indication on that just at the Peloton report. Of course, they crushed it, right? I think they had something like 130% growth.
And expecting it to keep going.
Yeah, that's the question. So we think about there are these stay-at-home stocks that you don't invest in them for the short term just because you think over the next 18 months. Now you may as a trade, it's not you may do it as a trade if you think people are going to flood into that stock. So you may do it as a trade, but if you're investing in them, you're not investing for 18 months, you're investing for longer periods of time than that. Your bet on a company like Peloton, and maybe it's the same as Netflix and some others, but certainly with Peloton, that you've brought forward a lot of growth. So if you thought Peloton was going to get to this level of customer base over the next 4 years, they brought it all into 2 quarters, and there's still a question of how big the market can get for them. But they've brought forward a lot of earnings and a lot of opportunities to upsell, not just now, but even over this this next period. So you might say, well, look, what happens to these? What's going to happen to Peloton after things get better? Well, they've elevated levels quite a bit. This isn't like, the way sort of like the pandemic kinds of stocks that I think about that have benefited from this near term, but may not elevate levels in the future, are the Walmarts and Home Depots. Because if you're Home Depot or Lowe's, in a lot of communities across America, you're the only game in town. All of the small stores had to close. Just these, some of the big box stores were able to stay open. Eventually, that's going to tail off, and people are able to start going to other stores. So that is a bump. I think of companies like Peloton and Netflix as having elevated. They've gotten to a level higher. It might come down a little bit, but they've brought forward a lot of growth into a lot earlier than they could have expected.
Yeah, especially Peloton. I mean, it's $2,000 for that bike. If you bought it in the pandemic, you're not going to throw it away and then pay a bunch of money on
I don't know. I thought of,
like you're going to keep using your Peloton. Right?
Yeah,
That's an expensive coat rack.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the, I mean, I'd like to have a Peloton, but I'm thinking about the secondary market. I do want to
exactly.
for those people who've like, all right, I'm tired of hanging my clothes on it. I'll buy their used Peloton. I bet the market for used Pelotons is probably pretty good too right now. Don't you think?
Definitely in the next 6 to 9 months, it's going to be
robust. Yeah. So those I think those transitions in the market they're going to be really interesting to watch.
And it's not just happened in the market. So I spent the summer up in Cape Cod. So basically everyone is kind of realizing that next summer is probably going to be similar to this summer, where you're not going to be flying to Europe. So you need to have a place that you can drive to, and Cape Cod is the perfect example. So a woman on our street, she put her house on the market in March for $900,000 and didn't sell. And then in July and August, a huge bidding war started. So she had 12 people bidding. And one of my friends is a real estate agent there, and he advised his client to offer $960,000 for the house in mid-August. And as an expert, he thought that was a good bid. What do you think the house sold for?
1.2.
Yep, 1.225.
Ah, really?
Yep.
I'm pretty good at this. Of course, I am sort of a Zillow voyeur, Yeah, but I did notice though, it looked like I remember I Zillow scroll like lots of places all the time, and just to see what the market is for a lot of things, and I actually remember looking at Cape Cod and some other areas, and actually I was surprised at the few number of places that were on the market for a long period of time.
Yeah, so where I am in Brewster, usually at this time there's about 90 houses for sale on the market, and right now there's only 40.
Yeah, it's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Is it because people have decided to just live in their houses, right? So they're not going to put them up?
No, because they've already been bought.
Oh,
those 50 houses have already been bought. Yeah.
Oh, so that's interesting, because I just assumed that it was a lot of people who've decided, I left there's no reason for me to work in my house in the city. I'm going to go work in my vacation house, and maybe
that is happening, but it's the people are buying the new houses.
Interesting.
Yeah, the amount of kids that are enrolled in the Lower Cape is up significantly.
And so that's must be a challenge for schools there.
Yeah, they're not. There was no way that they could ever think that you'd have 25 or 30% more kids. Yeah.
All right. There's so much to learn from this thing.
Yeah.
It's one of those things like 9/11, by the way, where you learn a whole lot of things that you hope you never have to use again.
Yeah, agreed.
I don't know if that's the case here. All right, let's take our last break here, and we'll be back on the Macrocast.
Our Associates and Analyst application is open. We are looking for current college seniors interested in economics, political science, or public policy to join us for a 2-year leadership program with start dates in June, September, and November 2021. Apply today and work on the top debates and policy issues in tech, healthcare, energy, trade, and more. You can apply by visiting the careers page of our website at hamiltonplacestrategies.com/careers.
Okay, we're back on the Macrocast. Guys, we had some central bank activity. This week we had ECB, Bank of Canada. Next week we've got the Fed and the Bank of England. What is there more for them to do right now? How are they seeing the world?
Yeah, right now it's a pretty most central banks are kind of in this set it and forget it mode with policy. They've already done an enormous amount of easing. There's some kind of tweaking and fine tuning that's going on at a lot of central banks. And we saw the Bank of Canada specifically messaging, pivoting away from an inclination to do more accommodation to tweaking and fine tuning what they've already got. That was sort of the takeaway there. The European Central Bank was not expected to make any policy moves and didn't. although the messaging on that was there was a little drama around the messaging. Last week on Tuesday, the chief economist came out and for the ECB came out and made a pointed comment about the role of a stronger euro in working basically as a headwind in their reflationary efforts. The traders took notice. The euro on that very day had been knocking on like 28-month highs against the dollar at $1.20, which is a pretty key level. And so traders listened to that kind of jawboning as maybe a foreshadowing of a European central bank that was more focused on the currency. That's not actually how it played out. President Lagarde was very balanced in her discussion of the currency. That was the main focus of the meeting yesterday. And then earlier this morning, Chief Economist Lane came out and basically doubled down on his view that the currency is an issue that the central bank needs to really consider. But right now the market seems to be giving Christine Lagarde, I think rightly so, the nod on who is really setting the policy here going forward. Like yeah, next week, I mean, the Bank of England is probably just sitting there, observing the lack of progress toward Brexit, like the rest of us, and so maybe saving their powder on that front. The Bank of Japan is going to be hammering on continuity with Abenomics after, as next week also features the Liberal Democratic Party lining up Abe's successor. And the Fed has, this was supposed to be a pretty consequential meeting where they were going to put in maybe enhanced guidance, but the commentary in past weeks has maybe stretched out that timeline a little bit. So expectations are not really as high for this meeting as they were in the past.
John, you said the Brexit word. Like, I don't think we've said Brexit on here for a while, but we actually did have some Brexit news this week, which was, Boris Johnson, maybe upending the exit and earning recriminations, not just from the Europeans, but even from Speaker Pelosi and others about the treatment of Northern Ireland here. It was like it reminded me that I used to pay attention to Brexit every single day.
Every day, yeah. And we always knew that Northern Ireland, there was no easy solution, and everyone just kind of like, we'll figure it out. And now they haven't figured it out, and it looks like we're going to go to court over it.
Yeah, I mean, they've got about a month if they want to actually line something up by the end of the year, which is the hard stop for Brexit at year end. If they want to line something up, they need an agreement roughly a month from now. And there is no indication that that's going to be the case. The pound has the British pound has taken note of this fact and has come off its recent highs. We've got miles to go, and obviously Boris Johnson has shifted gears a number of different times on this, but he's got a real appetite for brinksmanship on this point. And the banks are moving their base case. I mean, our base case is a hard Brexit. I don't think we're necessarily out of that far out of consensus.
Yeah, I don't think so either. One thing all central banks are saying, and I think certainly back here at the Fed, is fiscal support is still absolutely necessary. There's only so much they can do. We had the Senate yesterday pass a bill which to me was more of a political document. It was an opportunity to give Republicans in the Senate something to vote for. It was the bare minimum of things that they could support. Didn't even include stimulus checks for individuals. So people call it a skinny bill.
Right. I think Senator Schumer called it emaciated.
Yeah.
But it was, as you say, it was more of a political point, and very the sort of bookend, I guess, to the Democrats, the House Democrats HEROES Act, which again didn't really have any expectation of passing in its full form, but was sort of a negotiating marker. And where do you think? We've talked about this before,
after spending a lot of time in emerging markets, so this happens all the time in developing nations, where the guy that needs to get elected literally sends money to people a couple months before the election, and that's how it gets reelected. The Democrats want to let the Republicans send everybody in America money.
Isn't that the great irony?
The election, and the Republicans won't do it.
That's the irony, right? It should be the other way around, right? Republicans should be trying to push money to people and saying we are the ones here to help you, and the opposition party should be trying to block them.
Yeah,
and it's the opposite.
Well, Tony, do you think does this put what happened yesterday in the Senate? Does this put the ball firmly in the president's court for him to come in and?
Yeah, the president definitely needs to play, and the administration needs to play a bigger role here. If you're Senate Majority Leader McConnell, you've got a number of equities that you need to take care of, and not the least is the management of your caucus. And so he's got politics in his caucus that he has to deal with. He's got some members who are under pressure to have to do something and have something to go out and talk about what needs to get done. He has some members who are opposed. They've got a general rule, as most party caucuses do, that you only want to pass legislation that has the support of a majority of your own members. But the thing I think that is staring them in the face, is that you've got all of those politics, but you have what's happening in the real economy that I think is going to start, scaring them straight a little bit sooner than later. You have restaurants shutting down. By the way, in DC, an institution. I remember the day that it opened, Capitol Lounge.
Yep.
Cap Lounge was an institution. I remember very distinctly when it opened, and what how great it was to have it there on Capitol Hill. And they announced their closing yesterday, and that won't go unnoticed by a lot of staff and members. But I think you're going to see continue to see a lot more of that. The number of people receiving unemployment insurance is not falling at the moment.
Right, it's turned up.
It's turned up.
And it's very much related to, or coincides with the end of the PPP mandates, where you can't let fire people.
So I can't imagine that these guys are going to go into October and not have money sent to people, not because of political reasons, but for real economy reasons, but there are political benefits to it as well. And I think everyone is doing the things that they needed to do to satisfy their constituency. So was that important yesterday? A lot of people look at it as a waste of time. I think of it as really important.
Yeah.
It's a very important political thing to do to, let your caucus learn where the lines are, where the bare minimums are, where the votes are. Now you can go try to come together. Now it's up to the administration to execute a compromise here, and it's my base case that they will do that. And I don't think the final package will begin with the number 2 trillion. I think it'll be less than 2 trillion, but it'll be more than 1 trillion. And they'll do this and then go fight. But
yeah, a couple of weeks, maybe it was a week ago, Meadows was on CNBC and talking about the bill. And David Faber, he did a really good job as a journalist. He said, the first 2 bills passed very easily, and now we're having a hard time on the third. And the only difference between the first 2 bills and this one is you.
It's true that, look, let's be clear. Mark Meadows has never been part of a compromise. Compromise, getting legislation done on the Hill. That's not how he made his mark. Now, that was never really Mick Mulvaney's thing either. But really, Mark Meadows has always been an obstacle to trying to get things done on the Hill. So the idea that if this is going to get done, that it's going to be a Mark Meadows production, I think that's wishful thinking. Mnuchin is a deal maker. Mnuchin does have command of the issues better. He does have a better sense of the economic impact. And so I do think the Treasury Secretary probably in these next few weeks is going to play a bigger role on trying to get this thing done. And of course, we get a continuing resolution to get a budget, done for the rest of the year too.
Yeah. And I think that's it. You just raised the point about the continuing resolution. There's been some discussion that the Democrats might try to append the spending source that might be attached to the continuing resolution. The agreement between Speaker Pelosi and Secretary Mnuchin to have a clean bill, I think that's a very strong alliance. They have, by all reports, have a good rapport, and that was not a given. And that relationship is clearly taken a lot of work. And the idea that no matter what happens with the stimulus bill, we won't be compounding the problem, compounding the mistake with a government shutdown. I think that's an important marker to put down, and it's a very positive thing that both of them have made that commitment.
Yeah, but you're assuming that that's going to happen, and we're definitely shutting down. It's 2020.
Murphy's
law has applied.
For everyone's
rigorously.
Sake, but maybe you're right. Maybe it'll take a shutdown to actually get some of this stuff done. But I will tell you, the casualty in all of this of having politics work itself out is that in this intervening period, you have a lot of individuals and a lot of companies who aren't getting the help they need, and Cap Lounge, you can't hold on forever. And so while the politics is sorting itself out, you have people who fall through the cracks, and that's not good for anyone. Well, look, hey, we'll get hope we get some more news on this next week. We have I think enough to look forward to, especially with the Fed. But also just good day today to spend some time remembering 9/11. It's always a very sober remembrance. So take this weekend and reflect on that and the things that we're all dealing with today. Thanks for joining on the Macrocast. We'll be back next week. Actually, I will not be back next week. I'm on vacation next week. You guys take the handle next week.
Yep, I think we're going to address the election and a lot of the potential pitfalls of counting the votes.
It's going to be an interesting one. Have a great vacation, Tony.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Brendan. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Macrocast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and share.